There's a moment early in Metroid Prime 4 that perfectly encapsulates what makes this series so special. You squeeze through a narrow passage tangled with overgrown vegetation. The door slides open, the score swells, and suddenly you're standing before a breathtaking vista. It's here that the spark ignites, that unmistakable sense of wonder and curiosity, the urge to push forward and uncover the mysteries ahead. This is Metroid Prime. And crucially, the magic remains intact. Despite concerns raised in some previews, I'm delighted to say that Retro Studios has delivered. After years of anticipation, Metroid Prime 4 is finally here, a first-person action adventure that arrives both on the original Switch and Switch 2 with striking visuals, fluid performance, and thoughtful design. It also marks Retro Studios' first original release in over a decade, making this moment all the more significant. It's worth remembering just how long the road has been. The game was first announced back in 2017, mere months after the launch of the original Switch. Development began under Bandai Namco, but the project was ultimately rebooted with Retro Studios taking full control. The result is the Metroid Prime 4 we have today, a game that feels both familiar and fresh in all the best ways. So let's dig in. Today we'll explore the game's visuals, the performance profile, its audio, and what you can expect from the game itself, not to mention discussion about the top-tier HDR presentation. While Metroid Prime 4 is a cross-generation release, shipping on both Switch and Switch 2, we'll be focusing on the Switch 2 edition for this video as we don't yet have access to the game on original Switch hardware. So let's go ahead and dive in. Like its predecessors, the experience begins with a beautifully crafted menu system. Smooth, video-driven backgrounds echo the game's themes. It's a subtle but defining touch unique to the series, and I'm thrilled to see it return. My only real gripe is that giant Switch 2 edition banner proudly displayed on the title screen itself. Push forward, however, and the moment you step into the game world, it's clear Retro has built something truly special. The visual design is meticulous, atmospheric, and unmistakably Metroid Prime. Much like prior entries, Prime 4 opens with a major event, in this case an attack on a research station. You encounter a mix of allies and enemies as you fight your way through the facility, culminating in a brief boss battle. Defeating it triggers a cutscene, where a mysterious artifact transports Samus to another world, and from here, the true adventure begins. The game establishes its structure within the first hour or so. While Metroid Prime 3 split its campaign across multiple planets, Prime 4 returns to a single interconnected setting, anchored by a vast desert hub. It's evocative of Zelda Ocarina of Time or Shadow of the Colossus, large enough to feel imposing, yet deliberately constrained, serving as the atmospheric glue binding the world together. Your primary objective is to locate 5 keys hidden across 5 distinct biomes. Each delivers its own visual identity and atmosphere, giving Retro's artists ample room to showcase their craft. This area variety is a clear strength here. Fury Green is centered around a towering tree stretching towards the heavens with gorgeous ruins of alien architecture offset by lush plant life and flowing water. Volt Forge, the second area then, boasts architecture reminiscent of Ridley Scott's Prometheus, with 3 towering spires linked together by suspended skyways. A persistent rainstorm soaks the architecture in water, leading to beautiful reflective effects. A third area then leads you deep underground, where an abandoned medical facility lies entombed in ice, before you work your way back to the surface after thawing it out, dispatching the experiments that have gone wrong. Technically speaking, the game appears to run on Retro Studios' in-house engine, likely evolved from the one used in Metroid Prime Remastered. As with past titles, the focus here is not on bleeding-edge rendering techniques, rather on pristine design paired with high frame rates. Textures and materials are richly detailed with convincing specular highlights. World geometry mixes rugged, natural stone with sleek, otherworldly materials. There's beautiful lighting and shadow effects that were never possible in earlier Metroid Prime games, while animation and camera work remain a highlight. One of my favorite things about the Prime series are the Visor effects, and Metroid Prime 4 does a nice job updating them for a modern era. For instance, I love how rain droplets bead across Samus's visor, instantly grounding it as a pane of glass between her eyes and the world. Look closer and you'll spot a similar effect applied to her metallic arm cannon. In colder regions, the visor's edges frost over, while her arm cannon gathers delicate ice crystals. Step indoors from the snow and you'll even catch stray snowflakes striking the visor briefly before melting away. A subtle, beautiful touch. Pulling up the area map reveals another flourish, Samus's face briefly reflected in the visor. Did you see it? Let's look again. Yeah, details like these basically elevate the presentation, layering intimacy and realism. And of course, the world itself also brims with similar touches. Much like your visor, rain can be observed streaking down glass used in various structures, while screen space god rays, a once ubiquitous technique, punctuate the atmosphere with striking effect. They also leverage old school billboard textures and other similar techniques to sort of fill in the space. Basically a simple visual technique with a very low performance impact that's implemented very well. When driving across the desert then, not only does your bike leave trails in the sand, independently for the front and back wheels by the way, but the wheels themselves very carefully track changes in the terrain in a way that feels very visually satisfying. The point here is that the technology used in this game is not boundary pushing, but that's okay. The actual results themselves are truly beautiful. Retro Studios has once again prioritized artistry and performance over novelty, and the outcome is a timeless presentation just as with the original Metroid Prime back in 2002. Which, if you recall, launched around the same time as Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, which was pushing all these brand new techniques, yet I'd say it's Metroid Prime that has aged more gracefully. So I keep coming back to this focus on technical performance, right? But what does it actually mean in practice? Well, at least on Switch 2, the game offers two distinct modes. You're asked to choose one when you first boot up the game, though you can switch at any time. The options are straightforward on paper. You get 4K at 60 frames per second, or 1080p at 120, but as always the reality is a little more nuanced. Starting with the 4K 60 mode, I was slightly confused off the bat when it comes to pixel counting. You see, typically you look for sharp, obvious edges, and Samus's visor provides exactly that. The edges measure at native 4K, yet the surrounding world doesn't appear quite as sharp. So I found another edge, and that gave me a different result, 20 out of 30 steps, resulting in 1440p. The explanation? The visor surrounding the screen is rendered separately and composited into the main scene. In fact, those edges might even be 2D elements. It's actually a little difficult to tell. There is at least some lighting applied to it, but it could just be an overlay. However, because the visor is always on screen, your eyes kind of perceive the overall image as being sharper than it actually is. Anti-aliasing then is handled by SMAA, and the results are surprisingly great. There's no temporal AA, and the developers largely avoid low-resolution buffers, so the image retains a uniform sharpness. From a typical viewing distance, it genuinely does read like a native 4K image, even though it's very much 1440p. There's a slight interpolation visible, but it's very sharp, the best image quality I've seen from a Nintendo game on Switch 2 thus far. But there's another option, the 120Hz mode, and this one drops the resolution all the way down to 1080p, and this includes things like HUD elements, which are native 4K in the other mode. So naturally, everything is a bit softer. Even so, I'd argue that the presentation remains sharp enough. In fact, at 1080p, it's still significantly sharper and clearer than Metroid Prime Remastered was on the original Switch, by a significant margin even. So while you're trading resolution for fluidity, it doesn't actually feel like that large of a sacrifice. And this is doubly true because image quality is the only real trade-off. The performance mode does deliver the same visual fidelity as quality mode. There's no obvious difference here. I was happy to sacrifice a touch of clarity for sheer fluidity. 120 frames per second is fantastic for a first-person action game like this. And thankfully, when the developers promise 120 frames per second, they actually mean it in this case. This is not just an uncapped, fluctuating VRR style mode. The game actually does lock to 120 and holds it with complete consistency. Well, almost. You see, while all the dungeon-like areas were completely locked, I did notice some occasional, very tiny little dips when exploring the open world. When I say tiny, I mean just a couple dropped frames here or there, not actual sustained dips. It's very, very minor, I'd say. And all of this applies equally to the 60Hz mode, by the way. The main areas you explore, all flawless, but the open world, again, you get these tiny little disturbances on the frame time graph. It's so small that I really only picked up on this after benchmarking it with our tools. So yeah, the 60Hz mode, also smooth. But of course, motion clarity inevitably suffers at lower frame rates, which is why I usually use black frame insertion in such cases. And I don't mind that compromise, but BFI does slightly dim the image, which in this case turned out to be less than ideal. Why, you ask? The HDR. Yes, until now I'd argue that HDR has been a disappointment on Switch 2. The internal screen isn't true HDR to begin with, and docked games have generally struggled to make use of the feature. Kirby Air Riders, most recently, is downright shocking in how poor its HDR implementation really is. Prime 4, however, is a completely different story. For my money, this is one of the finest HDR presentations I've seen in years, standing shoulder to shoulder with the very best. The development team clearly understands the potential of HDR and has taken full advantage of it. Heck, I wanted to produce this video in HDR, but the Switch's HDR output doesn't cooperate with my capture equipment, so unfortunately, you'll just have to use your imagination. And that's actually where it really hit me. Jumping back into the game playing in HDR after recording it in SDR really showed me just how large of a difference there really is. Highlights blaze with eye-searing intensity, while shadows remain deep and rich, creating spectacular dynamic range. For those on LG OLEDs, I highly recommend switching to HGIG mode rather than dynamic tone mapping, which I typically rely on for Switch 2 stuff due to the subpar results. When using it, the impact is truly transformative. HDR genuinely reshapes the atmosphere of the game, making a huge leap forward. If you own a capable set, you absolutely owe it to yourself to experience this in HDR. Alas, unsurprisingly, portable mode does not fare as well. The screen simply cannot reproduce HDR convincingly. The brightness and uniform backlight just can't get it done. And its sluggish response time means that even at 120 Hz, lateral motion appears smeared. On top of that, portable mode drops to 720p when running in 120 mode, while quality mode seems to be mostly around 1080p. Image quality really isn't a problem in portable mode, but the motion and HDR issues definitely are visible. This is, of course, no fault of the game itself, however, just a commentary on the hardware experience. Of course, another technical aspect I'd like to quickly discuss here are the loading times, as I feel they're handled very well. So if you go back to the prior games, the whole idea was to hide loading behind either animation sequences or door opening sequences. And it works exactly like those first three games in this new one. But the actual reaction time of doors opening and whatnot is much quicker than it was before. You'll never find yourself getting stuck waiting for a door to open up after you've shot it. So that's another improvement in favor of Metroid Prime 4. So yeah, when it comes to the overall quality of the presentation, Prime 4 really does stand out as, in my opinion at least, one of the best looking games on Switch 2. It shows that cutting-edge techniques alone are not enough, and building your art around a spec designed to offer fast performance and consistency is equally important. I love advanced rendering features, of course, but it's not always the right solution, especially on a game that needs to run on the Switch 1. How well it runs on Switch 1 though still remains to be seen, but hopefully we'll find out soon enough. Speaking of hardware though, Prime 4 does take advantage of some key Switch 2 features as well. The most obvious one is of course support for the mouse. Prime 4 allows you to use the Joy-Con as a mouse, with the other for movement and jumping. When sat at a desk, it does work better than I expected. Sure, the relative thinness and use of the shoulder buttons feels a little bit strange as a mouse, but you get used to it. And if you're gonna use this mode, I recommend playing at 120 Hz as it makes the game feel way more responsive. So, what about the sound then? This is another area I always like to discuss in my reviews, and in the case of Metroid, it's doubly important. Much of Metroid's atmosphere has always leaned on the sound, so they had to get it right. The result? Pretty good overall, but not quite reaching the heights of the original Metroid Prime. Now, on the tech side of things, it does actually take full advantage of multi-channel surround sound, which the Switch is capable of, which is a huge plus. Discrete channels add a lot to the soundscape and help immerse you in the world. Sound effects are also spot on, very reminiscent of the older games, yet still feeling a bit fresh. The soundtrack, however, is what I value most in any Metroid game, and what we have here is somewhat variable. So when the themes kick in, the results are tremendous. I've used the Fury Green track for some of this video, and I think it's absolutely amazing. The same goes for various other themes throughout the game as well, but Metroid Prime 4 leans very heavily on ambiance. It's not a bad thing, mind you, but it also means that there's fewer memorable tunes in the game due to leaning on such ambient music and sound. I'm about halfway through the game at the time of writing, but I definitely feel it could have used a few more memorable tunes. Still, overall, it's well done, and when it hits great. So, what about the action then? Well, at its core, the controls, movement, combat, and platforming feel spot on, like a direct continuation of the series' lineage. But if you were paying attention to previews, you would be familiar with concerns about the new helper character, Miles McKenzie. But his role is a lot less intrusive than expected. Most of the game is in fact still played in isolation. Miles sets up a base in Fury Green and then largely stays there, rarely interrupting comms, which is a good thing. What previews did not reveal, however, is that you encounter other survivors as well, who then join Miles at camp while you continue on your adventure. These characters appear briefly in cutscenes with some occasional dialogue, but never to an annoying degree, and in fact, you kind of come to like them over time. Compare this to Metroid Prime 3's lengthy introduction with the constant chatter. This really is a non-issue. It doesn't fully recapture the complete solitude of Prime 1 or 2, but it smartly rolls back many of the third game's choices and is stronger for it. Now, the level design is also strong, with complex, multi-tiered environments packed with secrets that often require power-ups to uncover on return trips. The only downside is they're not quite as tightly woven as in the first game. The desert area, for instance, feels more like Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field. It's the connective tissue between all the different areas, as opposed to having the areas sort of overlap. It's less disruptive than Prime 3's ship mechanics, but still diminishes that sense of ultra-tight integration. Still, overall, while it doesn't reach the heights of the original, I'm very happy with Metroid Prime 4 overall as a massive fan of the series. In fact, it might be my second favorite in the series, depending on how it wraps up. It somehow manages to feel like a game made for a different time and place. It's evocative and special. And when it comes to the technical presentation on Switch 2, it's basically faultless. If that sounds interesting to you, then I encourage you, give it a shot.